I am live according to YouTube. Good evening, everyone. It's Gordon Causey. Good evening, Daniel Copeman, mon ami de Montréal, who writes, good evening, bonsoir, all, tous, tout. Yes, good evening to everyone. Guten Tag, buenos noches. It's as far as I'm going to go. Candy, of course, the Wonder Pup is here. I actually started early tonight. As I look at my clock right now, it's 10:29. I scheduled this to start at 10:30. So anyone showing up late, they're only going to miss the preamble, which is me looking after Candy the Wonder Pup, who got to go for a nice long walk, didn't you? Yeah, the last 3-4 nights in a row, we've taken the same walk. Dogs like habitual things. I think human beings like order. They like repetition. There's comfort in routine. Anyway, I've got her. Shake a ball. Lay down. Speak. Okay. Come on up. Show off the stripe. Down that. Come and get it. There you go. She's gentle. All right. And now it is 10:30. So now is the time I had scheduled to start. Before I really get going, the same old, same old. Welcome to my miserable little channel. No production values. Bare bones as it gets, just a simple laptop with the inboard or built-in computer or built-in microphone and camera. Nothing special. Content rules. If you like what I have to say, please hit that thumb up button. If you're not already subscribed, I'm somewhere around 960, 970 and around that area. If you want to add yourself, get me up to the 4-digit level. I've been stuck at the 3-digit level forever. At any rate, with that preamble out of the way, the strike or the lockout, depending on how you want to look at it. Elements of both to it. I went to work today. I worked an afternoon evening shift. And when I left for work, I started at 2 p.m. The shutdown of Canada's rail networks had been running for a number of hours, so more than 12 hours. And there was no indication that I saw that it was going to be resolved. And so I did some reading. It was frightening what I was reading. We're talking about there's talk, there was talk, and there may still be talk about the need for boil water advisories in Canada because chlorine, which is used to clean water, purify water, make water drinkable, it's in just about every water treatment facility in this country. I assume it's probably in every water treatment facility. They stopped shipping it 4 or 5 days ago because this shutdown of our rail lines was anticipated to occur Thursday at 12:01 at midnight, basically, that the rail lines were going to be shutting down. And chlorine is a controlled substance, and legally you cannot ship it by any other fashion other than by rail, at least in large quantities. Hank Holiday is here, my American friend from down south. Good to see you, Hank. And Danielle is here, and anyone else. I often forget to switch from top chat to live chat. I don't like to miss any of the messages. Regular viewers know that I love the engagement. So if you want to fill up that live chat box, you're most welcome. You can also comment down below. But at any rate, boil water advisories were said to be coming in Canada within 4 or 5 days, because of the fact that water treatment facilities would not be replenishing their supply of chemicals like chlorine to clean the water. And they keep on hand somewhere around 10 days supply. But because 4 or 5 days ago, they stopped shipping it because they didn't want chlorine and other things to be stuck in transit, so to speak, when the shutdown happened on Thursday. So they stopped shipping it 4 or 5 days ago. So that was going to be a huge issue. Obviously, we're into late August now. And in Canada, this is our harvesting season. This is when the crops, which have been growing all spring and summer, start to get harvested now. And I don't know percentages or anything like that, but a large chunk of Canada's agricultural output is transported on this nation's rail lines. And if they're shut down, how are farmers going to get their products or their produce, their goods to consumers? And so that was another huge issue. Think of grain. Many people living in Western Canada know they're an ubiquitous feature of the Western landscape are grain elevators, which load grain, wheat, whatever, into boxcars or container cars or whatever you call the rail cars that they're shipped in. They were not. This was going to be massive. This was going to be horrendous. This was going to be a killer blow to the Canadian economy. And it was inconceivable to me that things had gotten this far, it was both inconceivable and sadly conceivable. I could see why this was happening. Everyone knew, our government has to know how vitally important this nation's rail networks are, and yet they allowed things to get to this 11th hour and past the 11th hour, and midnight hit. It's just under 24 hours ago when CN Rail and Canadian Pacific Kansas City, CPKC, which I tend to refer to simply as CP, forgetting that the Kansas City connection, that it was all going to shut down and there would be no rail traffic in this country. And midnight hit, and CN and CP immediately shuttered their facilities. They locked the workers out, and it was sometime this afternoon, late this afternoon, I think sometime around 4 p.m. Eastern time, when Canada's Minister of Industry finally forced on the parties, which are the two rail companies, CNCP. I'm not going to say CP's KC, it's too many syllables. CNCP, those are the two. Forced them into binding arbitration with the union representing the rail workers. The union, incidentally, is the Teamsters. And so it looks on the surface as though disaster has been averted. However, I'm not willing to say that we're completely out of the woods yet. Things could still get ominous, and I'm going to be explaining why. I'm going to be sharing some mainstream news articles from CTV and CBC, which are, CBC is Canadian government-owned media, like the BBC in Britain. And CTV is a branch of Bell Media Corporation. And so these are two as mainstream as you get in Canada. Hank Holliday writes a question that was certainly on my mind and is still on my mind. Could it be they want this to happen, he asks. And that is a question that was certainly on my mind. I found out you're learning things constantly in today's world. And one of the things that I already knew in the background information, but it came forward, is the fact that Canadian Rail, CN, is the single largest shareholder of CN is none other than Bill Gates through a couple of his investment arms, one of which is the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And he has another investment company that also owns a chunk. And I think the total investment that's controlled by Bill Gates is somewhere in the neighborhood of $16 billion in terms of, the market capitalization of CN Rail is probably 150 to 200 billion. And I think he owns somewhere in around 15%. And that makes him the single largest shareholder in CN. When it comes to CP Rail, Canadian Pacific Kansas City, I believe the largest shareholder of that company is Warren Buffett through his investment companies like Berkshire Hathaway. And so you have two multi-billionaire, two of the richest men in the world, who own significant stakes in Canada's rail infrastructure. And I was at work today. It's a large retail establishment. I don't like to say where. I don't want to give my employer a plug, but anyone who, I'll give a hint. It's one of Canada's richest families owns this enterprise, and it's national in scope. I was something of a Chicken Little today at work. I didn't know that the binding arbitration had been ordered. And so I was telling people, you might want to stock up. You might want to make sure your gas tank is full. I found it remarkable that there were still people who were saying, well, okay, if the rail line shut down, that's okay. We'll move, we can get, goods can travel by truck. And it's like, really? You expect them to travel by truck? How do you think diesel makes its way around this country? Diesel fuel. So I had to repeatedly tell people that our rail lines are somewhat akin, in my view. I'm not an expert on things like logistics. I'm not an expert. I don't make any assertions to be an expert, but I don't think you have to be an expert to realize that this nation's rail lines are somewhat akin to being the blood vessels of this nation's economy. And if the blood isn't flowing in a patient, that patient dies. And if the rail lines aren't moving, the economy of a nation dies, certainly a nation like Canada that relies so heavily on this nation's rail lines. Daniel Copeman is here. He's back. And he goes, no petrol, no driving anywhere, period. Ha, 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 ha. Yeah, like it would be brutal. You've got, I brought it up earlier, our agricultural sector, harvesting their wheat and their apples and soybeans and whatever else is being grown. Probably 95% of it ends up being shipped on a train, and that was going to be shut down with no foreseeable end in sight. And I could not believe that our government had allowed things to get to the point where it actually shut down at midnight at 12 a.m. Thursday. So 22 hours, 23 hours ago, Canada's rail system shut down. And as far as I can tell from the reporting, it still has not opened back up, even though there is a binding arbitration order. And this is where things get murky. Allow me to read a couple of the articles. I'm going to start with the CBC. And the headline says it all. So I'm sharing my screen. Sharing, looking, comes. And before I get going on it, Sharunian Allegiance is here. True North is great channel covering all Canadian news. Very good. So she's giving them Sharunian's giving them a plug. It says trains could start rolling, quotes, within days, Labor Minister says after sending dispute to binding arbitration. So I have to go over to the article if I want to scroll. Two major freight railways came to a stop when labor talks collapsed. And this was written today at 12:18 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Freight traffic on Canada's two largest rail networks could resume within days, Labor Minister Steve McKinnon said Thursday after sending two labor disputes to binding arbitration. Canadian Railway, CN, and Canadian Pacific, Kansas City, locked out 9,300 engineers, conductors, and yard workers just after midnight Thursday, capping months of increasingly tense and bitter labor negotiations. Less than 17 hours after the lockout began, McKinnon announced he's using his powers as Labor Minister. Code allows the government to refer a labor dispute to the Canadian Industrial Relations Board, CIRB, to find a solution. McKinnon says he's directed the board to settle the outstanding terms of the collective bargaining agreements and impose final binding arbitration. I have also directed the board to extend the term of the current collective agreements until new agreements have been signed, and for operations on both railways to resume, quote unquote, forthwith. How soon is forthwith? We'll find out. McKinnon said he expects a resolution very quickly, but stressed that it's an independent process. Asked repeatedly when he thinks trains will start rolling, the minister said within days, which is a nice indeterminate number. Could be 2, could be 3. How many days are there in days? More than 1, that's all we know. Both rail companies released statements Thursday saying they would restart operations following McKinnon's announcement, but neither offered a timeline. McKinnon said an agreement between the two sites has been elusive so far, and talks were at an impasse. The parties remain very, very far apart on these issues, he said. The union said Thursday that picket lines will remain in place and criticized the government for referring the dispute to arbitration. This is where things get dicey, because will the Teamsters Union abide by, now that are they going to go into a strike? Are they going to refuse to return to work? That is a question. I don't know the answer. Despite claiming to value and honor the collective bargaining process, the federal government quickly used its authority to suspend it mere hours after an employer-imposed work stoppage, the union said in a statement. Quickly, I think the Canadian government moved far too slowly. There's going to already, they say that roughly $1 billion worth of goods are transported each and every day on Canada's rail networks. Likewise, it is said that for every day that the rail lines are shut down, that it will take 7 days for the supply chain, the broader supply chain, to recover, because things are going to back up. And it'll take, for every 1 day that the rail lines are down, that they'll need 7 days to get back to normal. So if we end up down for 3 days, that's 3 weeks. We end up down for 4 or 5 days, that'll be a month of potential disruptions, according to all the reporting. And this is coming out of the mainstream. The Teamsters Canada Rail Conference will review the minister's referral and the Canadian, I think it's the Industrial Review Board, their response, consulting with legal counsel to determine the next steps. Meanwhile, picket lines remain in place. So, according to this reporting from earlier today, the Teamsters are going to maintain their picket lines at various rail facilities across this country, while their legal counsel reviews this Industrial Review Board's documentation, whatever they're being told. They're going to consult with lawyers, and meanwhile, the picket lines are still there. Back to the article. Pressure from industry groups and provincial governments to resolve the conflict has been mounting for weeks. It took the government weeks to respond to this. We knew what was coming, and we knew the ramifications, boil water advisories, as I mentioned earlier, that we could be forced under because water treatment facilities aren't getting the chlorine they need to provide safe and drinkable water to Canadians. This is serious stuff. The companies haul a combined $1 billion in goods each day, according to the Railway Association of Canada. Many shipments were preemptively stopped to avoid stranding cargo, which is what I said about chlorine. They didn't want, it's a 4 or 5 day delivery time to get from, a production facility where the chlorine is manufactured, I guess, and then to get it to the end user. If that's 5 days, you can't have it getting halfway and then just stopping and sitting in a car. So they halted it 4 or 5 days ago. The impact affects tens of thousands of commuters in Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver. Those are basically Canada's 3 largest cities, whose rail lines run on Canadian Pacific, Kansas City-owned tracks. So if you don't have traffic controllers to dispatch them, then the passenger trains, I'm talking about GO for people in the the GO train. I used to ride it every day from Pickering, Ajax into Toronto downtown. They were not running. And then the article goes on to say, a quote, collective bargaining is always the best way forward. When that is no longer a foreseeable option, when we are facing serious consequences to our supply chains and the workers who depend on it, governments must act, Prime Minister idiot Justin Trudeau said on X or Twitter following McKinnon's announcement. You should have acted days, if not a week or two ago, Trudeau. But you're on vacation, and we certainly wouldn't want you to have to recall the legislature and the summer recess that our parliamentarians are enjoying right now, because that was one other option, and that may still be a required option if the workers refuse to come back to work. If they decide to maintain picket lines, then that would force the government to recall the legislature, our House of Commons, and to enact back to work legislation, making staying off the job punishable in some fashion or another. Anyway, Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters President Dennis Darby welcomed the move, but said it will take time for supply chains to return to normal. And he goes on to say the wind down of rail services over the last several days, culminating in the full stoppage this morning, has inflicted significant supply chain and operational challenges for manufacturers across the country. Issues that will take days, if not weeks, to resolve. A prolonged stoppage would have imposed enormous costs on Canadian business and workers and everybody. I mean, everything travels by rail. If you work in a company anywhere, I'm confident in saying that it's 99.9% likely that some vital facet of your employer's ability to operate requires products that are shipped by rail. Now we get into NDP leader Jagmeet Singh. And if you're not a Canadian, the NDP is Canada's Labour Party. They're highly financed by unions like the Teamsters. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh accused the federal government of undermining workers. And it quotes Jagmeet Singh as saying, the Liberals' actions are cowardly, anti-worker, and proof that they will always cave to corporate greed and Canadians will always pay for it, he said in a statement. There will be no end to lockouts now. Every employer knows they can get exactly what they want from Justin Trudeau by refusing to negotiate with their workers in good faith. And that puts the safety of workers and communities at risk. And then it goes on to detail bargaining played out in separate negotiations between each company and the Teamsters, which represents 6,000 CN workers and 3,300 CPKC workers. Then it gives a map of, I think the red is CN. Yeah, the red is CN rail, and the green, which kind of shows up as blue, though that's Canadian Pacific Kansas City. And this is how things get transported across Canada. Right up Great Slave Lake, Yellowknife, in the Northwest Territories. Each side has accused the other of failing to negotiate seriously. Jonathan Abacasis, Director of Public Affairs and Media Relations at CN Rail, said that without an agreement or binding arbitration, the company had no choice but to lock out employees. And this is from the CN side. The Teamsters have shown absolutely no desire to reach a negotiated settlement and prefer to hold Canadian supply chains hostage. We think it is irresponsible, reckless, and needs to come to an end as quickly as possible, he told CBC's The Current. The Teamsters haven't shown any urgency or any desire to reach a deal that's good for employees, the company, or the economy. And no, I'm not going to. Things could still get bad, and it's all over the reporting. I'm not going to the links. I don't think there's any need. And I'm not even going to read the CTV news article that I also read to inform me on this. I mean, things are bad and it's not completely resolved yet. Going to catch up on what's being written. Daniel Copeman retracted a couple message. Stranger in a strange land is here. Welcome. Good to have you back. Most households have only 3 days of food available, hence the phrase 9 meals to anarchy. I didn't know it was 3 days. I thought it was 4 or 5, but we're not far. What would happen if the country's if you went into the grocery store and there was no bread, no meat, and the shelves were half empty, and all that you could get was anchovy paste and artificial crab meat? That's the kind of situation we were faced with potentially. And it's still, I don't think we're completely out of the woods yet. As I was saying, I felt a little bit like Chicken Little today, because I was telling people you might want to load up. If this work stoppage ends up being a protracted work stoppage, I can't believe that it was allowed to get to this juncture, to get this critical, before the government finally stepped in and did something. But now we have Jagmeet Singh, leader of the NDP, the Labour Party of Canada, basically saber rattling. And it sounds like he's almost encouraging the labor unions, in this case, the Teamsters, to stay off the job. So we're not completely out of the woods yet. And this is... there was a part of me today, because I used this opportunity to witness regarding Christ, to preach Christ, because this world, our tenuous hold on this world is slipping. Had a few conversations about the World Economic Forum and their desire to bring in what they refer to as stakeholder capitalism, which is their means by which they will bring about sustainable development, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and how this would be a prime example. And they could say, you see, capitalism doesn't work. We need to bring in a controlled style economy to preclude these kinds of disasters. So basically, the government manufactures a crisis by allowing things to get to a critical phase, and then have Canadians suffer severe hardships, and then the government to come in and say, we will save you, we will rescue you from this disaster that we created, and we can no longer trust the free market, the capital markets, our system that has worked so wonderfully well for 50 years. Well, now it's just broken, and the only way for us to save it is to bring government even more into your personal sphere. This is freaky stuff. My mouth is drying out, so let me read what's being written. So Hank is writing, even when they resume, it will still affect the economy, and that is absolutely true. As I've been noting, this is not me saying this, is mainstream media outlet saying that for every day that the rail system is shut down, that there are 7 days of recovery needed because things back up. And it'll have some impact on the U.S. economy as well. They were talking about, they have cargo ships coming into places like Vancouver or Halifax or Quebec City, our Canada's major ports, and those big sea containers, what I call sea-tainers, that get loaded onto trains. Well, if there are no trains, and there was talking about having the transiting ships down to U.S. ports of entry, places in California. I don't know where they are, San Diego, wherever it is. They could send the ships down there and use the U.S. rail network to offload. But how much extra capacity is there in the U.S. system? Who knows? Mish Christie's asks, The question, should we start hoarding toilet paper? Because people will remember in March of 2020, when the COVID lockdowns, pandemic, and all that other insanity started, one of the first and most obvious impacts people saw was toilet paper. Amazing. People, our brains go straight to our ass. Sorry for the swearing, although an ass is also a donkey, so it's not 100% a negative word or a profane word. Anamonarchy writes, hey, hopefully I didn't miss too much. I just looked up the channel to see if there was a current discussion, didn't get a notification. Well, to make sure when you hit the bell that you darken it. So when you subscribe to the channel, just hitting subscribe is enough. Then you have to click the bell and then you get the notifications. So just a reminder. Sheriff, bring on the monkeypox. This has kind of been a theme of mine. And the theme has been that I say on this station all the time. It's something of my catchphrase, that the media is there to program you about what to think, what to believe, and even how to feel. And a lot of Canadians weren't paying attention to this. I could not believe the number of people I spoke to today who were like, really? There's a rail shutdown? Oh, yeah, I heard a little bit about that. But the manner in which they reported, Canadians were not being programmed to concern themselves with it. When it was anything else, when it was all things COVID, well, then they were programming people to be, this is a top issue, be very worried, be very concerned, be very afraid. But the rail shutdown, don't worry about it. Everything will be fine. And Sheriff is writing, bring on the monkeypox. When I ask people, do you hear the big news? We're in trouble. What, monkeypox? Because they're being programmed to think about monkeypox, not about the rail shutdown. John 5 is here. Good day, Mr. Causey. Wow, such respect. I am new to your content today. Thank you for the coverage. Is there a chance truckers and airplane or sea will follow? Anything's possible. Anything is possible. Although when it comes to rail in this country, in Canada, you've got two major companies. That's probably 98, 99% of all cargo that is shipped on the rails is CN or CP. When it comes to trucking, you have some independent operators. You've got Canada Cartage, and you have a few, but there isn't one single union representing, I think it's, tens of thousands of workers. So it's a different dynamic. So I don't think it will spill over. And John 5 writes, I hear pilots want to go on strike, but there's Air Canada, there's WestJet. They're all different kinds of airline companies. And while they may be unionized, their collective bargaining agreements, their CBAs, all don't come up for negotiation at the same time. So whereas one company may shut down, there are other companies that can mitigate, that can take some of the overflow. There's still an impact. Anyway, Anamonarchy writes, grok is a good word from the novel Stranger in a Strange Land. Its self-definition is to grasp a concept and complete comprehension. Okay. And he's got autocorrect changing what he's typing. Stranger writes, Isaiah 3:4, one of my favorite topics, the Bible. What does Isaiah chapter 3, verse 4 say? And I will give children to their princes, and babes shall rule over them. Our leaders act like immature children. Look at who we have for our prime minister of this country. And Justin Trudeau, I will say this, the man is doing his job. He does not represent Canadians. Justin Trudeau is a product of the World Economic Forum's Young Leaders Program. And I've said it before, the World Economic Forum is a confluence of groups of individuals. The financing of it comes from the corporate sector. They're the ones with their hands on the wheel, is the corporate sector, the Pfizers and the Googles and the Metas and the Jeff Bezoses, and the corporate sector is what funds the World Economic Forum. And then they bring in government and academia, and they basically plot out the direction they want the entire world to move in, and with little regard for national interests. Well, Canadians, we don't care about them. Americans, we don't care about them. Europeans, we don't care about them. African, we don't care about anyone except their corporate goals. And ultimately, I view it as a fascist enterprise. Fascism is where corporations own the means of production, to use a Marxist term. Corporations, the corporate sector is all well and good, and then the corporate sector directs government. The corporations basically push government in whichever direction they want them to go. And in terms of this shutdown, Justin Trudeau is a product of this World Economic Forum's Young Leadership Program. He is at the beck and call. He is beholden to the corporate interests at the WEF, to the Bill Gateses of this world. And if they want to shut down this nation's infrastructure, but it's his job to manage it in such a way politically so that he doesn't get blamed for it. And so what his talking point now is that, we have to let the collective bargaining process play out. But you've got two major corporations, CNCP, and then you have the Teamsters over here, and the Teamsters with their lovely history with Jimmy Hoffa, and inferences that the Teamsters are in bed politically with groups like the CIA and others. You and I are just bit players. Joe Citizen, Jane Citizen, Joe Sixpack, Sally Housecoat. We are just bit players. We're collateral damage. And there are bigger agendas at play here. That's my thinking. And if they could, we're talking zombie apocalypse if the Canadian rail network is shut down for any period of time. If it takes them a week to get the trains back rolling again, we are in deep crap. Think about people who are on insulin and other diabetic medication. I'm fairly confident in saying that, things like insulin probably in all likelihood, rely on our rail networks. Our hospitals rely, everything relies on rail in this country. And that our government would allow things to get to this stage is mind-blowing. And it's almost like they waited until this time. They waited for it to actually shut down. Now, will it start back up? That's the biggest question. That's the biggest fear that Canadians should have right now is, will it start back up? Just going to catch up, and then I'm going to make some points about how Canadians are basically oblivious to what's going on because the mainstream media is not programming them to be concerned about it. And my mouth is drying out. Stranger right. Okay, I read that. Anna Monarchy writes, a couple nights during the curfew. I went too far. Okay, Anna Monarchy writes, a couple nights during the curfew, I dumpster dived behind Walmart for some frozen good stuff in the winter. Adjacent to sorry things got that bad for you, Anna Monarchy. But I'm glad the cops didn't care. And Anna Monarchy says that they should have MPOX or monkeypox to LGBTQIA and SL and whatever else. No kidding. And goes on to say Boeing DEI hires. It's DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. But I think DIE is when you go down that road of diversity, equity, inclusion, the acronym would be better put as die, because that's what it's going to do to our society and the economy and everything else. It's all going to die. You need to hire the best possible people for especially important jobs, not DEI. John 5 writes, on television today, they were saying some people knew the train was out only the day of going to work at the station. Yeah, people, I'm sure that happened. People in Toronto area, GTA, I don't know where you are, John, but I imagine people in the GTA showed up at their, Pickering, Ajax, Oshawa, wherever, the GO train station, Bowmanville, and what do you mean the train's not running? Yeah, because CP controls the rails, and they're, people who run the switching equipment and everything else aren't at work today because they got locked out by their employer. And so good luck. Daniel Coleman writes, hire for experience, not color. Yeah, and not even hire for, it's a multi-layered. There's competence, there's conscientiousness, there's all kinds of metrics. And the last one, and shouldn't even color or race or ethnicity, should be out the window. Anna Markey writes, essentially, Trudeau is a controlled tool, unless in dinner table terminology, he's submissive, sycophantic bitch to those who outrank his authoritarian position. Now, he's owned completely. John 5, good God, 1 week can set us that much back. As a millennial, I don't know the gravity of that strike. And you'll find out if it happens. I'm being a bit of a Chicken Little in the sense that, but it's all predicated on how long it's shut down. And as I understand things right now, as I'm speaking at 11:10 p.m. Eastern time on this 22nd day of August, as I understand things currently, the rail system is still shut down. They haven't reopened it. Canada's Minister of Industry or Labor or whatever, this McKinnon, is saying that it will be within days, plural. How many days? 2, 5, 10? He didn't say. Will it be 3 or 4? Will it be 2 or 3? We don't know. And we're still waiting to see how the union, how the Teamsters is going to react. Are they going to tell their workers to go back to work? That would be the responsible thing to do, because you're inviting the zombie apocalypse if you do not get this nation's rail lines working again. Can you imagine 95% of Canadians rely on municipal water supplies? And can you imagine 95% of this country within a week being under boil water advisories? Can you imagine people being unable to get their medications because of disruptions in the supply chain? Can you imagine Canada's farmers, our agricultural sector, having to watch the produce, the goods that they have harvested from the fields, sit there and rot in a depot somewhere because there aren't trains to take it to warehouses and to get it out into the distribution network? This is bad, and it can be incredibly bad. And I get the feeling that a lot of Canadians are whistling past the graveyard, in a manner of speaking. Daniel writes, yeah, I can't even pronounce that word, but corporatocracy. We've got theocracy. Corporatocracy would be another word for fascism. That's the way I define fascism. In communism, the government owns the means of production. So everything is government owned. You want to buy a pair of boots, they come from government workers in a government-owned plant producing boots. And that's and they have this controlled system economy they used to have in the old Soviet Union. ZIS men, and they were in charge. Everything logistically had to transit through Moscow. So you had St. Petersburg here, and you had a town just below it. Everything that was produced in St. Petersburg would go to Moscow. And then after transiting through Moscow, then it would go to that town just south of St. Petersburg. Everything went through Moscow, central control. And that's, oh, Candy, come get, oh, someone walking down the street, and of course it's a little warm out and we've got the windows open, so now she can hear people shuffling down the road. I live in a residential section. Shut up. Anyway, yeah, that's a good term, corporatocracy, even if I'm not sure how to pronounce it. And Monarchy writes, I go for good, clean stuff from, I don't like reading about that stuff. I hope things start working out for you, Anna Monarchy. Sheriff of YouTube writes, I live next to the railway in Montreal. I'm happy they will be quiet for a few weeks. I thought about that. I live south of the tracks. When I moved to this town in Brighton, Ontario, I didn't realize the significance of the railway tracks. And we moved here we were looking for a house in March of 2015. And there was very little on the market, and there was nothing on the market north of the tracks. So we ended up south. And now pretty much every time I have to go into town or go anywhere, I have to go over both sets, both CNN, CP's tracks, and I get stopped regularly. And I was thinking about that myself. Well, I'm not going to get stopped by the trains now because they're not running. John, people are busy and tired, overworked. Oh, yes. And I like what Daniel is writing. He's telling me not to worry. That a degree of paranoia is healthy, keeps us alive. I did find some joy in this, and I did witness at work to a number of people. And I said, the only thing is I can find joy, I can find peace, I can find happiness because I'm in Christ. And so I know no matter how bad things get that I'm in the ark. Yeah, I was talking to a young lad with whom I work, who I've been witnessing to, he's gone out and bought a Bible, and he's never read one before in his life. He's 20 years of age. He has no grounding whatsoever in the Christian faith, but he's catching bits on the periphery, YouTube, social media, people witness. And so he figured, and I talked to him about it. So he bought a King James Bible. He asked me questions all the time. And I was telling him about Matthew, and I think it's 24 or 28. I forget the chapter, but it's where Jesus is asked about the end of the age. And he says, as it was in the days of Noah. And as it was in the days of Noah, people were giving their sons and daughters away in marriage. Basically, everyone's living their lives, and then bang, the flood came. Well, it's the same thing now. People are just living their lives. The news told me not to worry about it, so I'm not going to worry about it. I'm going to go do my shopping. I'm going to watch the kids play baseball, soccer, whatever the case. Everything's hunky-dory, and then bang, it's going to start to impact them. And that's if. Maybe by tomorrow, everything will be back and running and everything will be open, and we'll only have mild disruptions. But if this goes on for any length of time, we are in trouble. Townhouse Lisa's Life, formerly Townhouse Gardener, is on. Thank you for coming in. I am going to do something. I have to get some water because my mouth is drying out and my coffee cup is empty, and coffee's a diuretic anyway. So give me 2 seconds. I am still here. But I need to hydrate. Drink some water. Daniel writes, so no, Amazon orders might be late. God forbid. That was one thing that drove me crazy during the COVID nonsense, is that Amazon warehouses stayed open. And there are three fulfillment centers in the Toronto area where they reported hundreds of outbreaks, hundreds of cases of COVID, but they never got shut down. But a little nail salon, privately owned, has one case, and everyone goes crazy and screams at the owner to shut his business down or her business down. But Amazon, well, God forbid, we never shut down Amazon. It tells you where people's priorities are. Selfish, selfish, selfish. And Hank's asking everyone to hit the like. I've already gotten 7. Thank you guys. You guys are amazing. Love these lives. I love these chats. I love talking about what's happening in the world today. I love witnessing Christ. That's the most important thing, most vital thing in today's world. And I want to get on to something I was talking about, but I want to also catch up on what's in the live chat. And Sheriff says, nothing shutting down in Canada will be that bad. They proved that during COVID for 3 years. People need to be cut off from their meds. You know, the way one thought I had going off of what Sheriff is writing is that it doesn't become real until it affects you personally, until something you vitally need is impacted by the supply chain. I had people saying to me, well, you know, I live in a rural area and there are a lot of people on well water. Well, I'm on well water, so I'm okay. Boil water advisory won't impact me. Said eventually something will impact you, something vitally important to you. If it stays down, something vitally important, might be some form of medication, might be something you need for your vehicle, or you know, your vehicle needs to be repaired. The company you work at, maybe, you know, they say, oh, well, we're okay, but then they need hydraulic fluid for that key machine that's in the production line. Well, the hydraulic fluid comes from a company that they need rail, and the rail was shut down, and so we can't get that hydraulic fluid, and then, well, we're closing down. Everyone go home. Like, to a degree, it reminded me of that old poem that came out of World War II by a German cleric, a German member of the clergy, where he said, you know, first they went after the communists, but I wasn't a communist, so I didn't speak out. Then they went after the socialists, but I wasn't a socialist, so I didn't speak out. Then they went after the trade unionists, but I didn't belong to a trade union, so I didn't speak out. Then they came after the Jews, but I'm not Jewish, so I didn't speak out. Then they came after me, and there was no one left to speak out. So people will sit there and they'll notice that, well, this group has been impacted and that group, well, it doesn't affect me. It doesn't affect me. Well, eventually it will affect everyone if the supply chain gets damaged. Lisa writes, strangers writing, Christ is the ark of the end times to protect us from the flood of lies and deception of the enemy. Amen. You've got to be in Christ. And it is a choice. I can't force anyone. No one can force anyone. We have free will. It's your choice to get on that. Do you want to abide in the ark? Do you want to invite Jesus in so that you are protected, so that you're covered by his blood sacrifice? It's your choice. Lisa writes, Townhouse Gardener, not just Amazon. I heard water purifying. I mentioned that early in the at the start, pretty much, is that chlorine, which is a chemical used in water purification by just about, well, I think by every water treatment facility in Canada. And they only have 4 or 5 days worth of supply left. They keep on hand about 10 to 14 days supply. But the rail line stopped shipping chlorine 4 or 5 days ago because they knew that this Thursday lockdown shutdown was happening, and chlorine is not something that can be, it can't stop halfway and then just sit there. So they stopped shipping it. So water treatment facilities are already running low. They're running down what they have in their available supply. And if the rail lines don't start running again, they're not going to get resupplied, and we could be under boiled water advisories. That was being reported by CTV, CBC, and Global, and all the mainstream outlets. This is not conspiracy theory at all. This is mainstream as it gets. And now they've enacted this binding arbitration order, but the rail lines have not reopened yet. As I'm speaking right now, coming up to midnight, coming into Friday, then we're going to have a weekend. So if it doesn't get started tomorrow by Friday, we could be in the soup, to use an old expression. And this is what, Sheriff was saying, well, I can drink rainwater and eat oranges. Well, not in Montreal. No oranges grow in Montreal. The oranges have to get from California or Florida or wherever they're grown, and they have to get to you. And maybe you think they'll come by a truck, but that truck runs on diesel fuel, and diesel is another thing that travels on our rail lines. So things will get, if, this is where I feel like I'm trying to be qualifying my Chicken Little prognostications. If everything opens back up and gets running again, then the damage is going to be very hit and miss. Broadly speaking, I think we'll get through everything with very little tangible, noticeable impact if it starts within the next day or two. But if it takes a few days, a week, 2 weeks, we could be in deep, deep trouble. Sheriff writes, I use distiller for all my water anyways. Hey, coconuts and watermelon like Obama. Daniel puts up his favorite. Jesus is King, praying hands, the cross, 100. Sheriff writes, if a man is no longer willing to die for their honor, it is likely they will end up a cuckold like what we have in today's G7 societies in the Western developed world. Reading on, John 5. Is the strike totally justified? I don't know the work conditions. Okay, I have read up on the bones of contention. One, of course, is always wages. Apparently, according to, and this is from the Teamsters side, from the union side, they're saying that the rail companies were wanting to force relocations on railway workers, temporary forced relocations for areas where work labor shortages existed. So you're a rail worker, yard worker in Sudbury, where they have a surplus of workers, and somewhere out in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan has a shortage. And basically what they're saying is that the union is claiming that the companies, CN and CP, they want to force employees to relocate to areas where there are work shortages. That's one. Two is the union was complaining that the rail companies wanted to weaken fatigue rules. There are rules written into the collective bargaining agreement about how many hours consecutive a person can work and how much rest time they require between the end of a shift and the start of a shift. And apparently what the union is claiming is that the rail companies wanted to reduce the fatigue measures or the fatigue language in the collective bargaining agreement. And so the union is saying this will impact safety. So there's two things right there. And of course, wages is always on the table. And what I find interesting is now they've been locked out, and now CN, Canadian National, has said that they've reopened their doors, so to speak, but we don't know if the union is saying that they have set up picket lines at rail yards and corporate head office in Montreal and places. And are they going to take down their picket lines? Are they going to go back to work? Or are they not? This Industrial Review Board, Canadian Industrial Review Board, they are saying that they're going to, the old collective bargaining agreement that has expired, that they're going to extend it. And so that workers working while the binding arbitration process plays out, that workers will be under the terms of the old, now expired collective bargaining agreement. And who knows how long it will take. But the biggest concern that Canadians should have is in the rail lines reopening. So that's the best I can answer. John 5 is the strike. It's not so much a strike, it's a lockdown. They were initially locked down, but now it may boil down to a strike, and you cannot justify a strike. The supply chain is essential. People will die if the supply chain is down for any protracted period of time. There are things like life-saving medications that people need. Clean water is something that people need. People will die if the supply chain is down for any protracted period of time. So a strike is never justified. This is can you imagine a hospital shutting its doors? Sorry, you're bleeding to death. Well, just bleed out because we're not helping you. We're on strike. I said at the beginning that this nation's rail lines are almost akin, like we can liken them to the blood vessels of a human being. And if the blood stops circulating, people die. And if our rail lines are shut down for any protracted period of time, our economy will die. And I mean, it's just simple reality. Daniel writes, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. Sharunian says, Andrew Tate house was raided again. Okay. Hank Holiday writes, time to do it yourself train engine. I knew what you meant. Sheriff writes, if people will die, then you can expect a strike. But I doubt anyone will die from CN. People will die if, and it's an if there is a protracted shutdown. But I wanted to get on to something or get back to a point that I was making earlier. And I've said many times in this channel, it's almost my tagline, is that people in today's society, the majority of Canadians, or at least a good chunk, if not the majority, certainly a sizable minority, get their marching orders from television, and they listen to the nightly news, and it tells them what to think, what to believe, and how to feel. And during COVID, the Canadian population was told to think about it. This should be top of mind. Told to believe that it was an incredibly serious thing. That and how were they to feel? They were to feel very, very afraid. And dun, 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 more terrifying news from Bob Cajun, Ontario, as the tsunami of death continues at the Pine Ridge Nursing Home. And it's the music that they use in the lead into this story. It's the hyperbole, going through the thesaurus and looking up every scary word they can find. Tsunami of death. I actually saw those words in print. And that basically programmed the population. And that's why people were willing to follow stickers on a floor and down a grocery aisle, thinking, oh, these stickers are saving my life. And putting a diaper on their face, but taking it off when sitting down, because, that's what I am the science individual said. And people went along with it. And now we have a situation. And now I would submit that because a lot of people have woken up to the fact and they've said, you know what, the news is just garbage. News viewership is going down, 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 down. No one's paying attention to the news anymore. And now we have a situation where the train shut down and the news, people who are paying attention to it, aren't being programmed to have it as top of mind. You should be more worried about whether Amin Khalif and this Lu Ting, these boxers, you should be more worried about whether they're men or women. That's big news. That's important. The rail strike, that's secondary. So, okay, and people, that's what the TV told me. This is not a major issue, so I shouldn't be worried about it. And you got to be discerning in today's world. Everything is predicated on how long this shutdown persists. Is it going to be over in a day or two? Then we'll be okay. But if things persist, if this goes on for a week, we are in deep trouble. Farmers are in deep trouble. Their produce is going to be rotting in a train depot because no train's coming to pick it up. They'll truck it to the depot, but there are no rail cars coming to take it into processing plants, into processing centers, and then to retailers. So consumers aren't going to be getting, and prices are going to go up. Supply and demand. I'm going to read up and then I'm going to end it for the night. Daniel writes, throw the brainwashing box away. Television telling you will rot your mind. MSN, mainstream media, is the enemy of the people. Amen. Sheriff of YouTube writes, Amen Khalif has his balls tucked under it. Okay. Yeah. I'm basically taking that whole boxing controversy and everything to do with the Olympics, and I'm saying unimportant, doesn't matter. That does not impact me. It doesn't impact you. It doesn't impact 99.99999% of the population. So why are we? And I've been guilty of talking about it. I'm done with it. I don't care about it. Doesn't matter. Let him box. Let her box. Call him he or her or whatever. When it, I have individuals I work with. There are two individuals that I work with that are, one says that she is she says that she is gender fluid, and the other one is identifies as a man. There are two women with whom I work, and one is fluid, and the other one says I'm a man. And and one thing I have to do at some point is I want to witness to those two. And my Wednesday night, let's talk about Jesus. Let's talk about the Bible in the park. No one came out. So, although the young lad who bought the Bible, he said he'll be out tomorrow night. So we've rescheduled it, and we'll see if I can get some of these kids to come out. But I've also got to do it with these two gender confused individuals with whom I work. Christ is for everyone. He's not just he's for the lost. He's for the imprisoned. He's for the captive. He's for the downtrodden. He's for the sinners. That's when Jesus came the first time. Jesus was admonished by the religious leaders and elders of the day. You're sitting down with sinners and tax collectors and the bad people. And Jesus says that's, a healthy person doesn't need a physician. Make right the way of the Lord. Anyway, just reading on. Hey, bring it on, Sheriff. Bring it on. Lisa's life. The Bible says any man that shall adorn women's clothing is an abomination in my eyes. Yeah, you know what? I'm not the Lord. I don't sit in judgment. And that was under the Old Testament law, where God was setting up the people of Israel, the Israelites, to be a nation that would witness to him to the nations. And the fulfillment of that law was Jesus Christ when he came into the world. And Jesus rebuked a lot of the Old Testament teachings. He rebuked the religious leaders of the Israelites, the Pharisees and the scribes. He rebuked them. He, said, you love your traditions. What are the two greatest commandments? Love the Lord your God with all your body, heart, mind, and soul. Give God everything you have. And the second one is like it. Love others as do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Treat others as yourself. On this, all the laws of the prophets hang. They rely on these two. Orient yourself toward God, and then orient yourself, after lining yourself up with God, then manifest that outwardly on the horizontal plane. And anyway, Lisa goes on to say, it also says that no man shall lay down with a man the same way he lays down with a woman. Yeah, no. Unnatural relations, Paul talks about that as well. God gave them up to their lustful desires, to men and women both exchanging natural relations for unnatural. But the thing is, we all sin, we all fall short of God's glory. I am guilty myself of sexual sin. So I cannot sit in judgment of someone who is guilty of a different kind of sexual sin, because theirs is worse than mine. No. We've all fallen short of the glory of God. None of us can do it in of ourselves. We are not righteous by our actions. Why are you here? We're going to stand in judgment, by what did you do to gain entry, into God's holy, perfect, righteous presence? Nothing. People want to say, because I did this, because I did that, because I continued, because I followed, because I obeyed. No, it's not because of any of those things. It's not what you did. It's because of what he did on the cross. It's because of him that I am reconciled to a holy, perfect, righteous God. Because I am stained with sin. It's only through Jesus' loving sacrifice on the cross that I am made clean. So nothing that I did. Oh, I never gave in to sexual temptation. Oh, good, then you can come in. No, it doesn't work that way. Not according to the Bible. Not according to Christ. Not according to Scripture. Reading on. Sheriff says, Old Testament is wonderful. Jesus loved it. Okay, that's your... Jesus certainly knew the Old Testament. He knew the Scripture. He knew that Moses had given the Israelites... Moses had allowed the Israelites to divorce. But Jesus said, Moses gave you that law because of the hardness of your heart. But was it not written that from the beginning, that a man shall leave his mother and cling to his wife, and they shall become as one flesh? Therefore, what God has brought together, let no man tear asunder. And that I say to you, anyone who looks at a woman lustfully, desirously after her, that he has committed adultery in his heart, which is a breach of the Ten Commandments. Jesus is the fulfillment of the law. Stranger writes, okay, I'll leave that alone. Whale oil beef, late to the stream, and not enough time to do double time speed. No, probably not, because I'm going to wrap it up. Daniel Coleman writes, evening well. Yeah, better late than never. You made it. I appreciate it. Let's see what happens with this rail strike or lockdown or whatever you want to call it, this rail stoppage. As far as I know, now coming up 20 minutes to midnight. So it's been basically 24 hours. As far as I know, nothing has started up again. According to McKinnon, who's Canada's Labour Industry Minister, he has merely said that he anticipates that the rail networks will be operating again, quote unquote, within days, plural. How many days will it take? Will the Teamsters Union allow its workers, or will they instruct their workers to go back to work, or are they going to maintain their picket lines? This is an unfolding situation, and this is something that will, if this goes on for a week or more, this will impact every Canadian to one degree or another, but no one will come out of this unscathed. It'll affect everyone through inflationary pressure. It'll affect everyone because if it's a week or more, we will see things empty on the shelves, I promise you. It will have enormous, and people will die. And we will be under boil water advisories if it lasts a week or more. Because for every 1 day that the rail lines are shut down, it will take 7 days, roughly, for the supply chain to recover because things are going to be backing up. So just reading off the last little bit. Whale oil beef, also saying hi back. Daniel, Sheriff of YouTube, you are an unmitigated 100% shit-disturbing smartass, and I love you for it, okay? Hank Holiday, have a good night, peeps, and I'll say the same, and I'll end it the way I like to end it. May the Lord bless and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you, and even in these troubling times, no matter what happens with the rail situation, may the Lord grant you peace in your heart, in your soul, in your being. Abide in him, and it doesn't matter what this world throws at you. You'll be ready, you'll be armed, you'll be equipped. Put on the armor of God, and you're ready for any battle. So God bless, and we'll talk to you all probably tomorrow night. We'll see what happens. Good night.